Good evening. Welcome to part 6 of Bedtime Stories. At the conclusion of part 5, Flossie endured a vicious beating from the overseer. Ajuma is on his way to Magnolia Hill to see her. Ajuma's thoughts were on Flossie as he and his horse cantered down the dark dirt road leading up to Magnolia Hill. He rounded a sharp curve in the road and froze like a statue in the center of town square. 3 grimy fellows were blocking his path. They were the lowest form of human. They were slave patrollers. Well, look at what we got us here, Jonas. Ooh, I declare this must be our lucky night, one of them said. The one named Jonas dismounted his horse, scratching his crotch as he drew closer to Ajuma to get a better look. Why, I believe you might be right, Clint. We got ourselves a big, bright-skinned buck in his prime, sitting astride a piece of horseflesh like he's the king of one of them there heathen countries from across the waters. And look at them there eyes on him. Ain't never seen eyes that green on a buck before. Bet you he's one of them there half-breeds, you think? The man named Jonas drew his pistol, aiming it dead in the center of Ajuma's chest. Now, I wonder how he came to be in possession of such a fine horse, don't you, Clem? Jonas must have been infected with lice because now he was scratching his grimy neck and under his dirty arms. Well, Jonas, truth be told, I was thinking the exact same thing, he said. Where'd you get that there horse, boy? Clem asked. Ajuma remained silent. Looks like the cat got his tongue, Clem said with his eyes locked on Ajuma. He must have stole that horse, Jonas. That there horse is way too good for the likes of him. Bet you some rich planter is missing a horse and a buck, if you ask me. Nobody asked you, asshole, Ajuma thought bitterly. Up until that point, the third man remained a dark, silent specter in the background. Ajuma felt waves of menace flowing from him. He guessed the third patroller, whom they called Jim Bob, was a man of action and few words. Jim Bob dismounted the sway-back nag he had been sitting astride and moved to stand not 2 feet from Ajuma. With eyes so evil he would have frightened a lesser man. But Ajuma wasn't a man. He was Nephilim. Jim Bob's voice snapped Ajuma back to attention. He asked you a question, boy, and I'm waiting for the answer. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I ain't fitting to ask you again, he said, while uncoiling a thick, long whip he pulled from the side of his saddle. Now, where in tarnation did you steal that horse from, boy? He demanded. Jim Bob's nostrils flared when his threat was again met with silence. Frustrated, he spat a long stream of tobacco, which just barely missed Ajuma's pant leg, instead splashing up against the side of his horse. Now that shit just ain't right, Ajuma thought. Disrespect me if you want, not my damn horse. Jim Bob addressed his cohorts without taking his eyes off Ajuma for a second. Well, he's way past curfew, and I would bet my hairy left nut he ain't got no papers on him either. I say we forego the bounty they probably got on him and string him up. Take that fine-looking horse he stole. With superhuman lightning speed, Ajuma was off that horse and standing within a few inches of Jim Bob. The deadly smile on his face revealed the tips of bright white fangs, fangs which were growing longer by the second. Jim Bob raised his hand to strike Ajuma with the handle of his whip, but before he could lower his hand to deliver the blow, Ajuma reached inside the startled man's chest cavity, puncturing ribs, bones, and he wrenched the man's heart out. Before the body could hit the ground, he latched his fangs into his neck, taking deep, satisfying gulps of the dead man's blood. The sharp report of a pistol and the resulting sting in his right shoulder brought Ajuma's attention back to the other two men. He dropped Jim Bob's dead body like a discarded toy and turned his attention on Jonas. Clem ran off into the woods. Ajuma was unconcerned with his futile attempt at escape. He knew he wouldn't get far. He shook the shoulder wound off as if it were merely a bee sting and advanced upon Jonas with single-minded intent. Jonas tripped in his haste to get away and was now crawling backwards, cutting his wrists and hands on the sharp rocks in the road. Ajuma picked up the ripe, earthy smell of human waste. He laughed when he realized the human had soiled himself. Out of his mind with fear, Jonas couldn't string two coherent words together to beg for his miserable life. Ajuma was merciless. The old fowl lying on the ground before him had intended to string him up and steal his horse. He knelt beside the terrified man and whispered in his ear, "Like you said earlier, today is your lucky day." And then he snapped his scrawny neck. Ajuma ghosted into Flossie's small cabin to find his son fast asleep and Flossie curled up in a ball of agony. The skin on her back that had once been so beautiful and smooth to the touch was now covered with a crisscross pattern of painful welts. Some of the welts were still oozing blood. An invisible hand reached inside Ajuma's chest, painfully squeezing his heart. He was finding it difficult to breathe. Blood-red tears streamed down his cheeks. Flossie immediately started to cry, not from her injuries, but from the anger they generated in Ajuma. She'd never seen this side of her gentle giant before, and it frightened her. "Flossie," he said, "I swear by all that is holy, upon the light of the Ancient of Days and all his angels, upon my very soul, that I will kill the animal that did this to you," he vowed, with his teeth bared and a murderous look on his countenance. "Every white on this God-forsaken plantation will die tonight," he said. "Ajuma, my love," Flossie said, taking his large, callous hand in hers. "If you kill every white on this plantation, more will come to take their place. They will rain down upon us like locusts with their weapons of death and destruction, and they will stomp every black man, woman, and child into the dirt beneath their feet. They will not only come during the night, my love," she said. "They will come during the day as well, when you and your army of angel men will be powerless to help us." Something in the resignation in Flossie's voice managed to penetrate the red-hot curtain of rage in front of Ajuma's face. "Listen to me," he said in an urgent whisper. "I have to lead a squadron of men on a fact-finding mission on the 3rd level of hell tonight. I will come to you tomorrow when all are asleep. I intend to take you and my son away from this evil place. No one will ever hurt you again," he said with conviction. "Now give me the name of the one who did this to you," he demanded. As Ajuma was consoling Flossie, the one the slaves called Mr. Mike was sitting in his cabin, rip-roaring drunk. Without his big horse, his whip, and his brace of pistols to back him up, Mike was nothing more than a cowardly, illiterate piece of poor white trash. He wiped his mouth with the back of his grimy hand after slamming the half-empty bottle of Kentucky bourbon on the rough-hewn hardwood table in his cabin. He took in his surroundings with disdain. His employer forced him to live in a cabin not much better than the ones the slaves lived in. There was a narrow cot in one corner, the chair he sat on, and the wooden table the half-empty bottle of bourbon resided on, nothing else. There was a bristling sound as Mr. Mike's sweaty arm made contact with his unshaven face. He narrowed his pale blue eyes, his sullen gaze locked on the amber liquor swirling in the bottle. To the Etiennes, he was no more than a paid white slave, hired to do their dirty work. He hated each and every one of them, youngest to the oldest. If I could gather every Etienne in a locked room, he thought, I would surround the room with dry straw and light a flint. Yes, I would burn them to cinders, and that would be too good for the lot of them. He raised the bottle of liquid forgetfulness to his lips. His wrist still hurt from the beating he gave that Flossie gal earlier, watching her tight little black ass clench together each time the whip struck home made his manhood as hard as cast iron. Even now he was aroused by the memory of the beating. He touched himself through his sweaty trousers. Tomorrow he intended to seek Flossie out again. He would drag her little black ass in the barn and have at her. He licked his chapped lips in anticipation. As far as Mike was concerned, there was nothing on earth better than a bottle of good old Kentucky bourbon and the sensation of sinking inside the moist heat of some pregnant black woman's body, especially an unwilling one. It took another big swallow for him to deal with that thought. He was thinking maybe he might make that big black buck Colby watch as he had at her. The sound of his sinister laughter filled the cabin. His laughter and lascivious thoughts were interrupted by the sound of rushing wind outside the cabin. He jerked his head up as a gold-flecked fog filtered through the cracks and around all four sides of his door. A stream of steaming hot piss ran down Mike's pant leg as the mist coalesced into a huge black buck with evil green eyes, a set of wings, and some lethal fangs. Mike knew then and there he was looking into the wicked green eyes of the angel of death. Thank you again for allowing me to read yet another excerpt from my novel entitled The Bliss of the Grave. Good night.